My name is Alejandro Roark, and I am the Executive Director for Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership. HTTP is a CEO roundtable of 16 of the country's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organizations who work in coalition to promote the access, adoption, and full utilization of technology and telecommunications resources by the Latino community across the United States. HTTP's Connected Communities Digital Forum is dedicated to exploring the intersection of ethics, technology, and public policy by engaging scholars, community thought leaders, and policymakers from diverse backgrounds to give greater context to the lived reality of the Latino community within our increasingly digital world. Today's installment is a celebration of Latina leadership in tech and telecommunications policy. And as we think of that, women, and specifically Latinas, are the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs across the United States. They are at the forefront of every social movement, from our economic justice movement, the environmental justice movement, workers' justice movement. And just recently, it was two Latinas and through their leadership that made our arrival on Mars possible. So for this very special edition of our digital forum, I am happy to be able to turn the mic over to a friend and colleague, Silvana Effio. Silvana has worked for several local TV news stations. She has worked as a writer for local newspapers and later moved on to become a reporter, a producer, an executive producer, news director, and news anchor for Telemundo Utah. She is also the proud mom of two girls. So Silvana, thank you so much for joining us today and for moderating today's conversation.
Thank you, Alejandro. It's such a pleasure. It's a true honor to be part of this conversation. I am so excited to be able to have a dialogue with these amazing women. Like you said, my name is Silvana Effio. I am a Hispanic journalist. I moved here to the United States when I was 17 years old. And I know that it takes a lot of hard work and dedication to be able to achieve your dreams and some goals in life as a Latina, as a woman, as an immigrant. So I know that this conversation will be a great help to many. And hopefully we all learn something new from this dialogue. So before we begin, I want to invite our audience who are watching live to join the conversation using the hashtag HTTPLatina. And I have set aside some time by the end of this conversation for our women today to answer some questions for you. So you can be part of this conversation. Just make sure that you use the hashtag HTTPLatina. So like I said, I am honored to be joined today by three dynamic Latina women leaders who, through their example, are charting a new path towards a more inclusive tech future where every person has a digital connection and the necessary skills to participate and benefit from our 21st century digital economy. We have today with us Alisa Valentin, Special Advisor to FCC Commissioner Starks. We have Diana Moreno, Attorney Advisor at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And we have Jessica Martinez, Legislative Director for Congressman Marc Veasey. So thank you all for being here with us today. I am very excited to hear your stories. But let's start with Diana. I would love to start our conversation with you, Diana, because I know your parents immigrated from Mexico and you grew up in a community on the US-Mexico border. So do you mind sharing a little bit more about you and your personal journey into tech policy and the work that you currently do at NTIA, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me to today's discussion. It's a pleasure to be here today, and especially surrounded by my colleagues and who are magnificent women, and I have the pleasure of working with in the DC tech sphere. So as Silvana mentioned, I'm an attorney advisor at NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. I'm basically an internet attorney, and my agency works with providing expert advice to the President of the United States when it comes to issues related to telecommunications, the internet, spectrum. So whenever there's an issue on the news having to do with social media, 5G, satellites, you can be sure that the President's going to turn to us for any recommendations or research. And my agency works very hard to make sure that the internet tries to be more accessible and affordable to as many Americans as possible. And we do that through grants and research. And also, as you mentioned, I myself are a proud El Pasoan. I was born and raised on the border. Over 70% of the population, if you don't already know, is Latino. So I grew up with a strong sense of community and cultura. I am also a first generation everything when it comes to my family. I was the first one to go to college, graduate from college, first to go to grad school, first attorney, first professional. And it's not just for my core family, it was also for my extended family. So all my tios and tias and primos, I was the first one to break that far. And it's this all because my parents placed such a high value on education. My dad both of my parents worked very manual intensive jobs throughout their lives. My dad worked as a custodian, window washer, and ultimately in shipping, where he would load and unload 18-wheeler trucks. And my mom worked night shifts at a textile company, maquiladora. And so they would come home very tired at the end of the day, and they would really try to instill to my brother and I, like, to become something of ourselves, to not have to work so hard in your bodies to the bone just for so little money. So it also helped that I had a passion for technology early on to fuel those dreams of education. And I blame my abuelita for that, because my abuelita was a gamer. She loved playing video games. So every weekend she would get together all her vices and she would turn on her Super Nintendo and just play some games. And it really brought together the family when it comes to just that type of entertainment. So when I got to middle school, even though I went to not the best ranked school in El Paso, it was kind of poor. It was a Title I school in Texas. But we had a really good gifted and talented program. And it was through that program that I learned how to program at an early age. I learned how to make my own computer, how to build it, and even a little bit of electrical engineering. And so just knowing this bit of information made me excited that maybe I can make a video game that will make my grandma proud of me and happy and just continuously bring the family together for many nights. And I did start out as a computer science major in undergrad, but as one does during undergrad, you also find out other passions that you have. And so I found out that I had a deep passion for policy and the law. I became fascinated with the idea of being an attorney and having the power to influence policies and benefit my community and just help them at a much grander scale. And so I switched majors. I switched to political science. I was able to spend a semester on Capitol Hill interning there, and I fell in love with Washington, D.C. And I made it a point to come back to D.C. in law school. And that's exactly what I did. But even then, after graduation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something wrong. I was still keeping up with emerging technologies. I missed programming. And so the love for technology was still there. And so after a bit of an identity crisis, I decided, hey, there's a way for me to combine both the law and technology. So I went back to law school, this time for a postgraduate law degree. It's called an LLM. And I studied intellectual property, but it was a way for me to do this. I got to intern at many technology-focused organizations around DC. For example, Iridium Communications, which makes satellite phones. I was at TSA, where I worked with inventors that came up with the technology to detect national security threats. I was interning at NTIA, and I also worked for ACT, the App Association, which is a trade organization that represents app developers. So since then, my career has been so fulfilling, and I'm very happy with my decision.
Excellent. What an amazing story. And I can relate to where you said you were having a little bit of an identity crisis, because I feel like maybe I'm going through something like that right now after becoming a mom of two in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. Before that, I was working in journalism all the time. And now I am a full-time mom doing small jobs here and there as a journalist. Not with a full-time job. That's what I meant. So I am going through something like that. So it's important for women to know that this is a normal thing. It happens, right? It's not always the same for the rest of your life. There's up and downs and there's changes. And that makes you who you are in the end. And that it gives you your strengths. Thank you, Diana, for sharing that story with us. I would like to continue with Alisa. Alisa, I love to hear about your experience entering the world of tech policy. We just heard a little bit of Diana's experience. Can you share about your personal background and your professional journey? What sparked your interest in telecommunications policy?
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much for having me here today. So again, my name is Alisa Valentin. I am the special advisor to FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Starks. So I work on broadband access and adoption policies, particularly as it relates to communities of color, low-income communities, and other marginalized groups. Future of work is also in my portfolio, as well as prison phone justice. So I've had kind of a interesting journey to this space. So just kind of like, going, back in my life. I grew up in South Georgia for the most part. My parents were in the military though. So we lived all over the world in Kansas, California, Germany, Turkey, Belgium, all over the place. And, through all of those experiences and kind of like growing up in like military communities, I was so used to always being around people from different backgrounds. And I didn't really have like a real understanding of like race and ethnicity until I moved to South Georgia. And I was constantly being asked what race I was. And it was then when I was like, 8, 9 years old, that my mom was having to explain to me, like, that she's Black and from Hazelhurst, Georgia. My dad's Puerto Rican, grew up in Buffalo, New York. But again, when you kind of grow up in, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial, households, it's just normal to have people around you who kind of have like different traditions. But, different, in my view, is a good thing. And so whether it be, visiting, my dad's family in Buffalo or like going to Puerto Rico with him or visiting my mom's family in Hazelhurst, Georgia, it was always great to learn more about the traditions of, various parts of my families. And I always want to be someone who, carries those traditions on. And I would say, I was thinking a little bit about the fact that, my grandparents, they definitely were folks who had to do that manual labor, right? And in my household, my parents always talked about the fact that you always want to do, more and better than the generation before you. My parents both have associate's degrees, so both my brother and I have PhDs, and college was not really an option in our household. It was more so, what college are you going to and what are you going to study? And when I was a senior, it was a junior in high school, I was really interested in journalism because even though I know it's going to sound like super dorky, but I went to like this CNN camp when I was in high school, and I just got really interested in journalism, decided I wanted to study journalism. I went to the University of Florida, studied journalism there. Then I went on to Northwestern and studied journalism. But I also learned about, the fact that I didn't know a lot about how media really works. I knew how to create stories, but I didn't know a lot about, media ownership. And I got my PhD at Howard University, and it was my first year there. I learned a lot about media ownership, media policy, and obviously we're already in DC. All my friends were like starting to become, lawyers, graduate from Howard Law. And I was like, oh yeah, this whole, media policy world, this is definitely for me. I got really interested in issues, again, on media ownership. I started doing research related to digital divide. I specifically looked at the city of Philadelphia and the digital divide there that impacts Latinx households and Black households. And from there, I went to, after I graduated, I became a Communications Justice Fellow at Public Knowledge, studied broadband access and artificial intelligence policies, future of work. And then I went on to become the special advisor in Commissioner Stark's office. And something that, kind of is always in the background of all the work I do is definitely, how I can help create a more equitable and more just society. And I think that, we truly are our ancestors' wildest dreams, but it's important for us to be able to, reach back and, and give back to our communities, whether it be through having conversations like this or in, the policies that we kind of push forward and advocate for.
Excellent, Alisa. Thank you for sharing your story. I think we're starting to see a couple of themes here. One is the role that family plays in shaping our perception about what is possible, both in our education and in our careers. Two, how internships are a great way to explore topics and careers that we might not have considered before. And 3, the fact that because there are still very few Latinas represented as a part of the policy-making process, it is important to first and foremost express interest in the topic and seek out mentors. Now, Jessica, similar to Diana, your parents also immigrated to the United States from Mexico, and you were born and raised in Utah. So how did you get from Utah to working for the FCC, the very important Energy and Commerce Committee, and now as the legislative director for a member of Congress?
Yeah, thank you so much again. And it was so great hearing the other ladies' stories as well. Just, I like Diana said, we kind of work with each other and know each other from the DC Latinos in tech space. We're small, but we're growing. And so it's really great to hear just more coming out from them. I'm Jessica Martinez. I am originally from Utah. And it's funny, Alisa was talking about how she grew up in a multicultural area. And for me, it was just such a complete opposite where my parents are, from Mexico, but I was born in Utah, and it's predominantly white. I mean, it's a very, very, I would say, a lot of the Latinos that were in my community were extended family, or just like other people. So it was good. I loved growing up in where I'm from a small rural town. It's called Tremonton. And, I graduated high school. I took some time, to be honest, away from college before going in because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I just kind of tried to find myself a little bit. I worked a bunch of blue collar jobs. I was, as a cashier. I worked at a call center. I did a bunch of it. I served at restaurants, and you touched on family. I think family is a really important part of my life. It helps. They help guide me in a lot of my decisions, and they're always my backbone when I have questions or when I need somebody to rely on. So very close knit with my family and with my extended family. And my brother, actually, he's the oldest. I'm the youngest of four. I'm the youngest of 4, and my brother was the first one to graduate high school, go to college, kind of like Diana's story. And, he mentioned to me, Jessica, if you're really trying to get out of your small town, like, you got to go back to school. And so I did. I enrolled in the University of Utah, and I started, I was actually more interested in languages. So I understood Spanish. I wanted to learn French. So to be different, I guess. But I was actually going back to just some of my other jobs that I was working at. I was serving at a restaurant, and really my first taste of kind of the political lens of things was through lobbying and through trade associations, and kind of seeing their interactions on how they, talk to people in the state capitol and stuff. And so coincidentally, one of my French classmates, I was talking to her about this, and she was like, "Well, my husband's a lobbyist," and I was like, "Oh, give me a job." And so she actually, with connections and networking, honestly, was kind of got my first start working in the state. I worked at a trade association doing state lobbying, and then through the University of Utah's it was the Hinckley Institute of Politics. They have a program where, for political science majors, you can go out and do an internship in DC. I applied because I think, when I started working at the state capitol, I just noticed a lot of people didn't look like me. And when you see lawmakers or public figures talking about issues, and they talk about it in a lens where you're like, that's not how I perceive it. I wanted to see what else was out there and how I could really make a difference, and how I could bring the voice of my family, of my community, into the table and to these decision-making areas. So I moved to DC. I got an internship working for then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid's office. I sold my car, and me and my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, we moved out to DC, came out here. That was back in 2013. And, really it was just a lot of networking. And then just to kind of hard pivot back into what brought me to tech. I've always been interested in tech, and I love sci-fi. I love the idea that there's like all of these new technologies that can come up and really recreate our world. And I was always one to ask questions. And so, I just really tried to network, hustle to get jobs, but also letting people know, like, I'm interested in this work and I'm going to do good work and I'm going to show my value here. And really through that has helped me, land some of the positions that I was able to get. I started, like I said, in the Senate. I went to an outside lobbying firm for about 2 years. I came back into the House working for the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over the FCC and the FTC and a lot of other issues related to technology and telecommunications. And then after that, I was able to work for now acting chairwoman Rosenworcel in her office as special advisor for about 2.5 years, just really homing in on a lot more policy and just taking it all in, policy related to tech and telecom and media ownership and all of these great topics that these ladies have already brought up. And then it was just, again, with some relationships that I had in networking, one of my friends had mentioned that she's leaving her office and she's like, I think you'd be a good fit for my boss, Representative Marc Veasey. And he is on the Energy and Commerce Committee, subcommittee on communications and technology. And so, it was like a perfect fit for me where I knew the committee, I knew the work. My boss is a really great guy, very laid back, very interested in wanting to bridge the digital divide and making sure that, there's digital equity all around. So that is what brought me here.
Excellent. Great story.
Sorry, really quick. I also, throughout all that, also became a mom of 2. So I totally get it. And I, getting, that's a job in itself. And it's challenging and awful, but it's so rewarding. And like, it's going to take a village. So I'm here for you, Silvana.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. I need those words right now. I just gave birth to my baby, Daria. She's a month and a week.
Oh, congratulations.
So I recently became a mom of 2.
Oh my God.
I'm getting used to the new schedule, waking up in the middle of the night every 2 hours and all of that, and having 2 babies. Very different than just one, actually. A lot of work, like you said, but it's beautiful. So I would like to take some time to ask some questions to our panelists right now. And I remember, Alisa, you mentioned something that I completely agree with. You said, different for me is a good thing. I agree with that. But I know many Latinas feel different because they have a different cultural background. So how did this benefit you in your career, being different, having a different cultural background, knowing about different cultures, all of that? What would you say was helpful for you?
Yeah, I would say one thing is like curiosity, right? Like always wanting to know more, always wanting to know how different groups are impacted by, different policies, whether it be, related to race or related to folks with disabilities, people who are experiencing homelessness. I always am just curious and always want to know more. And then I would also say that, particularly being a graduate at Howard University, we always, learn during school how to take up space, right? Show up in the world fully as the person you are in every single meeting. Speak on, behalf of your ancestors, right? Speak on behalf of your grandparents, your parents, all the people that you're representing. I think that's something that's important as well. And I think that more people are doing that now. But I do feel like there was a time period where people were a little timid to really show who they truly are. But now I am definitely, unapologetically me, unapologetically Black, unapologetically Latina. So I think that's something that's really important that I hope that other folks do as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Alisa. I have a question for Diana too. Diana, can you give some advice to those young professionals, Latina women who are starting and who maybe do not have that confidence yet, that they know it all about their careers or their professions? What advice would you give them for their first interview, for example?
I would say that you belong there, even though it might have been a very lonely path. that you did not see very many people with the same background as you are having fulfilled your dreams out there. You belong there just as much as everybody. And once you are in that space, you end up finding out that you were never alone in the first place. There's a lot of us. There's Alisa, there's Jessica, there's a lot of other people in this sphere that have done what you've done and are just pursuing to do. So you have what it takes, and you have more to offer. You have such, like Jessica mentioned earlier, is that you have a unique perspective and experience that a lot of people aren't privileged to, or aren't privy to, and also sometimes turn a blind eye to. So when you have those experiences, you are being like, you have a lot to offer. So just have that confidence. Like Alisa said, speak on behalf of your ancestors, speak on behalf of everybody. You belong there. You've done the hard work, and you're not alone. You may not see them, but once you're there, you're going to see a lot of us in there cheering you on as well.
Jessica, you mentioned that you grew up in Utah, which is mostly white, right? Especially a few years ago. Now it's getting a little bit more diverse.
There's more diversity coming for sure.
Yes, especially in Salt Lake City. We have a lot of people coming from California, I know, and everywhere. But you mentioned that, and I'm curious to know, did you ever feel out of place or a sense of not belonging there, even though you were born and raised there, but you had a Latino background?
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100% I did. Because it's hard, right? Like, I think there's a little bit of the sense that you want to fit in. And I'm not going to lie, at the beginning, it was I didn't want to speak a lot of Spanish. I didn't want, there was a point in time when the schools told families, hey, if your kids want to succeed, you better make sure that they speak English very well, and that they don't speak Spanish in the homes and stuff like that. And that wasn't that long ago, right? That was like 20 years ago. And now we have all these immersion programs, which is wonderful, but it's, I feel like there's a generation lost right here of this Latinos in the United States. That being said, though, I think it really, I did rely so much on my family. I mean, I'll just bring it back to the family, in that it's, anytime you felt like maybe you didn't belong, you always knew you had that support system. And that's what helped me along my way. I mean, I could go on, but I didn't want to take up all day.
Do you feel, all of you, and maybe Jessica, you can continue to answer this question, but do you feel that having that your education and becoming a professional gave you that confidence that you needed to start as a professional and to achieve those goals?
Yeah, sorry. So I was actually, thank you so much for asking that question. I was going to say beforehand too, I think it's on many different layers, right? For me, I didn't go to school right afterwards. And so I had a lot of other experience where I learned soft skills, and I learned a lot of different life skills. I was able to really more relate with blue collar jobs and blue collar workers. So when I came to DC, that was tough. It was a tough adjustment to kind of understand the vernacular, the way that people talked, and the way that people, talk about where they come from. And I mean, I'll give a good example. The Federal Communications Commission is so important, and they have such smart people who work there, right? you have engineers, you have lawyers, or you have economists. And so going into that space, not having any of those backgrounds was it was very intimidating, because you're talking to people who just have all this knowledge. And I think reminding yourself, like, you're there for a reason. And the reason that I'm here is because I'm bringing my own perspective, and I am not afraid to ask questions, and I'm not afraid to ask, what are the pros and cons? Have you thought about it in this lens? Have you thought about it through this viewpoint? And so even though it may seem intimidating as you're talking to other people with different credentials, a good piece of advice that I have learned to really take on with me is, oftentimes your experience becomes your expertise, and where you can really just bring that in, and it helps allow you that confidence to meet them at that table.
Excellent. Thank you all for answering those questions. and for sharing your personal stories with us today. I know we all know now in your current positions, you are all very, very influential women when it comes to your ability to shape our country's strategy to expand digital opportunity and connect every home. And it's amazing to hear the background of how you became what you are today. I know all people in the audience right now are appreciating all of your advice, and I am too. But let me continue. In 2021, we are seeing a lot of talk about the importance of expanding our broadband infrastructure, how to best mitigate the harmful impacts of hate speech online, and how to best protect our personal data, among many other things. So, do you mind please sharing with us what, in your opinion, is the best way for our audience to engage in the policymaking process? What types of policies should be on our radar and how to become involved? Diana, let's start with you.
I'd say most importantly, thank you for that question. I think most importantly is to seek a seat at the table. And I think both to some extent, Alisa and Jessica have mentioned that we have to make ourselves known. And again, our voices matter. And again, our experiences are very unique. For a lot of our colleagues, it was so much easier for them to acquire any technology that they wanted. And that's not the case for a lot of Latinos in our community. It's so hard for us to acquire your first computer, to have even a cell phone with an unlimited data plans. And we have seen no greater example of this technology inequality than that in the pandemic. And we have seen our students struggle to log online for their classes. They are trying to log on their parents' cell phone. They can't afford a laptop, and they may not have internet. And even when they do have internet, it might not be fast enough. So their classes just freeze up and they miss out on a large chunk of their lectures. And we see them sitting out in parking lots of libraries and schools, just trying to get that Wi-Fi signal. And we have also seen it in this past couple of months, just trying to get medical services. I love how far we have gone with telehealth and how much more accessible it is. But then doctors and nurses are assuming that their patients know how to install the right app. They know how to upload documents. Like my father just a couple of months ago had a heck of a time trying to register my mom for an appointment because he doesn't have an email address. He's never attached documents. And the doctors and nurses were already so busy, and they couldn't teach their patients how to do this. So I had to do that for him. We see that with the vaccine registrations as well. We see that we streamline the process, but then we forget that the very first group that qualifies for these vaccines, most of them have never touched a computer. They don't have the internet access. So it falls on the children and the grandchildren to register their family members for the vaccine. And I shudder to think those that don't have these connections. So it's all these assumptions that are being made without any Latino input that are to the detriment of Latino communities. So it's so important to be at that table, to make all policymakers aware that we face of the issues that we face, and that what they see, what their reality is not the same for the rest of us.
Excellent. Thank you, Diana. Jessica or Alisa, would you like to say something about what policies to get involved? I think, Alisa.
Yeah. Sure. So I definitely agree with everything Diana said. Engage with us, right? Like, we want to hear directly from people in the community, and for you to tell us what is working and what is not working. Right now at the FCC, we're working on the emergency broadband benefit, which will hopefully get out to low-income consumers by the end of April. And this benefit will provide a discount of up to $50 per month towards broadband service for eligible households, and up to $75 per month if these households are on tribal lands, as well as a one-time discount of up to $100 to purchase a connected device, such as a laptop or a tablet. And we really have an opportunity to help bridge the digital divide in low-income communities and in communities of color. I think a lot of times over the last several years, and even now to an extent, we've been focused a lot on the issue of broadband access in rural communities, which is, of course, really important. Some of us are from rural areas here, but we also have to couple that with discussions of broadband adoption. We need to talk about affordability. For so many families, $10 to $15 is what is affordable. $5 is what is affordable to some people. So I think going forward, we definitely need to have low-income families. We need to have Black families, Latinx families, immigrant families at the table telling us what policies they need that will positively impact their lives. Because this is definitely, as Diana said, this impacts access to telehealth, your ability to sign up for a vaccine. It impacts, education, impacts how we are interacting right now during a pandemic, how you stay in touch with families and friends. So I definitely think, now and then in years to come, we will definitely have to, focus on how we can close the digital divide in Latinx communities.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alisa.
Sorry, no, I was just going to piggyback off that. I love that Alisa brought up the EVB program. That's what I was going to do as well. Because that's something that last year, my boss had introduced, and we're so happy and excited to see it go through. And the FCC is doing great work in getting that put together and out. And now it's just going to be more of a public education campaign to get the word out that there is a benefit for people here, to help them get online. One other thing I would say is, just as from where I sit too, you have elected officials and who represent you and your interests. Don't be scared to reach out to them, and don't be scared to maybe even go on the lower, on the local level as well, because I know that this notion, everybody gets pretty wrapped up in the national headlines, and they are very, very important. But I will say that, all politics is local, and you still can make a lot of impact by going to those city council meetings, by checking in to see what your county commissioner is doing, by looking at what your representative is voting on. It's hard to pay attention to that stuff because everybody's got their own lives, but, trying to peek in every once in a while is always going to be beneficial in the end.
Excellent. Thank you all. We have a few questions that came in through Twitter, and I would like all of you to answer this question specifically. It says, if you could meet yourself at the start of your career, what advice would you give yourself, or what is the best piece of advice that someone has given you? So let's start with Diana.
Sure. I'll address this to little Diana. I think it would, two very important things. One of them is that a life is not a straightforward shot forward. A life goes all over the place. It goes backwards. Sometimes it stops. Sometimes it goes topsy-turvy. It goes way, but sometimes it redirects into a whole different direction. And that's all part of the process. Do not let others' timelines guide you. Make your own path. You will get to where you need to. And then secondly, most importantly, it goes back to what I said earlier, is that you're not alone. And I know it was a very lonely journey, but once you're up here, you will get there. And I think that has to do with how we as people that are already policymakers should open ourselves up to mentorship. And go back to our communities and make that visualization known. And there was a perfect Instagram post, and I even have it attached to my monitor. It's that I saw from a page called Cafecito con Estrellas. It says, it hits differently when an educated mujer who looks like me says, you can do it too. And that's just so true. And it would have made my path a lot easier and a lot less lonely.
Wow, that's great advice. Definitely. It does hit different. Definitely. Alisa, can you tell our audience today what is the best piece of advice that you've gotten, or what's the best piece of advice that you would give a person who's starting their career?
Yeah, I would say when I was in undergrad, Dr. Stephanie Evans actually gave a great piece of advice. I wasn't too pressed about going to like grad school or getting a PhD, but it was probably like my sophomore or junior year of undergrad. And she let me know the best route for me to take is to go ahead and get my master's, get my PhD, and do it all at one time, because I would not want to go back to school later. And I think that she is right. For me personally, I don't think I could have like gone back and had 5 more years of a PhD program. So I'm glad I listened to her. I actually am going to be in her book that she's publishing here soon about Black women in public health. And I'm writing about, broadband access and Black maternal health. And so things really come full circle. I would also say the advice that Diana just gave about like, you belong there, right? You belong, at the table that you're seated at. I think that's like really helps. You have to kind of, shift your mentality and think that, right? And think in kind of like a positive way. And when you shift your mentality, I think that will have great benefits.
Excellent. Alisa, can I follow up that comment that you made? How did you shape your mentality? Because we can tell them, you have to feel like you belong in that table, but how do you shift from not feeling that to actually feeling like you belong there, that there's a reason why you're there?
Yeah, I would say it helps when, this is something else that Diana said, when there's other people who look like you who are at the table, right? And who are participating in the same kind of process that you're trying to participate in. When I was, in grad school, I interned with Commissioner Mignon Clyburn, first Black woman to be a commissioner at the FCC. And that helped me, right? Because I was sitting in the same room with someone who, is doing such great work, and someone who's making history in real time. Or even when I was a legislative fellow on the Hill for Congresswoman Clark, same thing, like you're seeing someone making history in real time. And I think that helps to shift your mentality, because you see people who look like you who are already in those positions.
Representation, definitely important. We need more of that. Definitely. Jessica, what is a piece of advice that you would give our audience today who's starting their careers?
Yeah, these ladies have given really good advice, and I would also just add to myself, if I was talking to myself, 10 years ago, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to do things the right way. You're going to be able to, you can just pick up the pieces and brush it off your shoulder and move forward. And it's going to be okay. It really will be. Like, it's not, I think that's one of my biggest things, is that realizing that I'm not always going to make the right move, but that there's always tomorrow, and that there are people you can rely on and people you can kind of lean on to help guide you to your next move. And then, just 2 other things would be staying positive about it. I just am an eternal optimist for those things. I mean, yeah. Bubbly has been a term that's been used on me quite often. So I'd say that's one. But yeah, and then the other one is just ensure that you keep, that you're being kind, that you're opening up and you're being nice to people, because, you never know in this town, it is so small, that your intern a few years could turn out to be your boss. And, if you just always got to make sure that you're being cool.
Good advice. Good advice. You just said something very interesting, and I feel like it's important to continue a little bit of our conversation about that before we end this dialogue, which is you being bubbly. They're not only bubbly, but in the Latino culture, for example, women many times can be bubbly, can be happy. That's part of our culture. I think it's in us, it's in our blood. So they can be misjudged, right? Misinterpreted. How have you all dealt with this? Have you had to change your behavior in professional setups? Or yes, that's the question. How do you handle this? Being part of your culture, how do you manage that in a professional setup? Diana, can you tell us, how have you been able to deal with that?
I'm so glad you bring this up, because again, coming from El Paso, it's just so community-based. And so when I did pre-law classes back then, there would be what's called the Socratic method. You have to stand up and answer questions and like talk about an entire case. And we would help each other. We'd be whispering like, I know, or like sneaking in little Post-it notes. So when I got to law school here in DC, I would try to do that, help my colleagues, and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" And it's so also competitive. I came here surrounded by like not a lot of my own people, and it's also a competitive environment. So my bubbly like personality just consistently clashed, and I would hear it all the time. It's like, "You're going to law school? You're an attorney? It's like, you're too bubbly. Like, oh, you can't do this." And believe it or not, I work a lot in litigation as well. There's a lot more than just being clear cut. And it's given me a lot of imposter syndrome over the years because should I just be clear cut? But I'm not being authentic to myself. So the way I've dealt with this is finally admitting that I'm always going to be a dorky, bubbly person that smiles too much, and just there's so much happiness when it comes to that. I will unapologetically tell you that I play video games, that I do all these things because it's a lot more true to myself. It makes you realize that there's a lot of people that also will lift the veil that they have and just be a lot more real with you. So it takes some work, but it's a lot easier if you just admit that to yourself, and it doesn't mean anything. You can do what you're doing.
Excellent. Your abuelita probably enjoys knowing that you continue that tradition, that family tradition of the video games.
Absolutely.
I see Alisa and Jessica both nodding their heads like this. Alisa, tell me a little bit about your experience and how you dealt with that.
Yeah, I would say definitely, again, I agree with everything Diana says, but, be authentically you. Like that is the best thing that you can do. Like you'll feel so much better if you show up at work the same way that you show up, around family and friends. Just be yourself. And I thought it was also an interesting point Diana was bringing up about people being like competitive. I think, that's such a DC, and everyone is so competitive. And sometimes I am just always thinking to myself, like, the only person I'm really competing with is myself, right? I want to be able to be someone, who builds community with other folks, with like-minded people, people from similar backgrounds. And I think, a good example of someone who I think, showed that for me, Daiquiri Ryan. She is the chair of Latinasintech DC. And when I came to work at Public Knowledge, she immediately was very open and friendly and wanted to collaborate with me on projects. And just having someone there in that space with me who was willing to reach out, it was something that was so important to me. And she's someone who, helped me get to where I'm at today.
Excellent. Jessica, what was your experience with this?
Yeah, I also want to just do a shout out to some of the other outside organizations that are in town. For Capitol Hill, there's the Congressional Hispanic Staff Association. I signed up right when I came out as an intern, and you really find a lot of people who are like-minded. And so, going to the general body meetings, going to the after, they have networking, social networking. They had a softball team. So there's just a lot of ways that you could kind of connect with people who understood your background and understood where you were coming from, and knew that you were going to be overly friendly and that you're always like, where's the comida? Like, let's do this. And it put everybody's guard down a little, which was really nice, so that you knew as you were coming into different meetings, I had some really good mentors who helped me understand a little bit, again, going back to just the way that people act out here, and how, in order to really present yourself in such a way where you can kind of be seen a little bit more competent, a little bit more, professional. And that was fine. I took their advice. I took what they gave me, but I also made it my own. And as I've just come, through more and more from my career, I would absolutely say I've become more comfortable in my own skin. I know my strengths and my weaknesses. And my last thing I'll say is, also just bringing back to being a mom too has really changed my perspective in the way that I act. And I can be very happy, but sometimes I have to sit my kids down and I'm like, listen, there's a problem. You can't throw those things in the house. and this is what we're going to do. And it just, and now my demeanor changes and I'm able to really become my mom. And I see that in her. And that's when things are getting serious. So I've also been able to utilize that too.
Excellent. Jessica, you mentioned mentors too. How did you choose your mentors? Because this is a topic that it's talked about a lot, right? When you're starting in a profession, you're always told to find a mentor. But I don't think young people, we don't know how to choose a mentor. We could be choosing someone random who's not really, the best example. So how did you choose, Jessica, your mentors?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say a lot of the times they weren't formal. They were very much, I met them at an event or I worked with them and I built a relationship. I could sense that they were also willing to help. I think as you see a lot of professionals out here are so busy and everybody's running around and everybody's trying to make that hustle. And it's an art, to ensure that you can kind of build a relationship, a real meaningful one. That's how it has always been. That's how I've been able to really find the ones that I've kept throughout these years, and again, just being authentic, asking them, being open and letting them know, hey, I would love to get your advice on X. I kind of made sure that when I did ask for their time, I was very targeted in what I wanted. So it was like, hey, I'm applying for this job. I have, this, I want to ask you questions on X, Y, and Z. Can you please take out 15 minutes of your time? And it was a little bit more structured from my end. And that was how I have found to be helpful. But yeah, again, to going back, some of them were more formal mentorships that turned out really well, but those weren't always the case in my case.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for sharing your stories, for sharing your time with us. I want to thank you, Alisa, Jessica, and Diana for being part of this great conversation that, like I said, I know will be very helpful for our audience. I hope everyone have enjoyed this conversation. And I want to thank also HTTP for hosting this great dialogue today. Please make sure to follow our panelists on Twitter. You all have Twitter accounts, is that correct? Yes. We will make sure to put their information in the video description below. And please also make sure to follow HTTP on their social channels at httppolicy to be the first to hear about their upcoming conversations presented as part of their Connected Communities Digital Briefing Forum. Until next time, again, thank you for joining us. I am Silvana Effio. I look forward to seeing you again all soon.